Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Bustamante. We're continuing to talk about 3.4, and we've been talking about endergonic and exergonic reactions and how we couple them or we pair them up essentially in the cell in order to help the cell maintain its function and be able to complete tasks by taking things that need energy and things that give off energy to make it more efficient and again complete those tasks within the cell. So that form of energy in the cell is ATP. Sometimes you'll hear that ATP is the currency of the cell, like the money of the cell, what we put in order to get out product, if you will. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. You'll notice it's a nucleotide. Okay, it has an adenine group here, it has a ribose sugar, and then it has 3 phosphate groups attached to it. And these phosphate groups are really what plays a key role when we're talking about energy transfer and use in the cell. So ATP, making and breaking bonds. Here's our ATP molecule again, and we'll notice these 3 phosphate groups. Down here, you'll notice, say, if we add some water and break off a bond, right? Well, we break off just the phosphate group. In fact, here we just broke off one of them, giving us adenosine diphosphate, or ADP for that di, meaning that there's 2 of them. Tri means that there's 3 of them in that of those phosphate groups. And when we do that, you'll notice it will also give off energy. Well, when the bonds between these phosphate groups, when we lose that 3rd phosphate group, that's how we release the energy. Now, actually, it doesn't come from the breaking of that phosphate bond. It's actually because ADP has a lower free energy state than ADP, but that's not super important for you to know. That's just something I kind of think is interesting. So changing from ATP to ADP is how we provide energy to a lot of things, mostly in this phosphate group. And I think it's really interesting to think about how ATP stores energy, right? Because we can use our knowledge of charges in order to think about how this energy is stored a little bit, right? Well, each of these phosphate groups is negative, right? And adding our first phosphate group, probably not a big deal because like positive, neutral, negative, neutral, not too hard to push together kind of, right? But as we add our second one, we're starting to push together 2 negative charges, right? And when we think about that, well, charges that are the same actually repel each other. They're not attracted to each other. So we're kind of pushing those negative charges together. And then we push even a 3rd negative charge on there. So this bond right here is actually a really high energy bond, meaning when we break it, it gives off the energy that we need. So one way to kind of think about these phosphate groups on your ATP is it's kind of like a spring-loaded situation, right? Where everything's compressed together, and if you give it a little space, it'll pop right off, right? And so that's why we can think about ATP as giving us our energy, right? This bond right here is really a high energy bond, and it is actually pretty unstable, which makes this phosphate in ATP or ATP molecule itself a really good energy donor for the cell because it kind of wants to get rid of that phosphate, if you will. So what's our overall big picture from this part of the notes, right? We talked about ATP as the energy, and we talked a lot about endergonic and exergonic reactions, right? Endergonic reactions are going to require energy. Some things that are endergonic reactions, we talk about active transport, right? Sometimes in order to move molecules against the concentration gradient, we have to add ATP to it in order to pump them through, if you will. Cell movements, right? Getting that cell to move, your flagella will take some ATP in order to work. And anabolic reactions, right? Require energy to put things together too, to make up bigger molecules. Exergonic reactions are ones that are going to release energy. Cellular respiration is a great example of this. It's how we're going to make the ATP or get the ATP essentially that the cell needs. And catabolic reactions, right, where we break apart, say macromolecules, are also going to give off energy. So when we bind these together, we can use them in the cell and we can provide energy to an endergonic reaction from an exergonic reaction by coupling them together.